Today's first topic is the 13th through the 15th Amendments and the aftermath of the Civil War.
So the 13th Amendment had abolished slavery.
Yep. And the 14th Amendment defined who was a U.S. citizen and who was offered protection against state infringements on citizens' rights. It also changed how representatives of the House were chosen and how former Confederates were punished.
The 15th Amendment extended the right to vote because at the time the government was finding ways to restrict African Americans from voting, such as like the grandfather clause, which is if your grandfather was black, then you couldn't vote. Also the property clause, in which if you didn't own property, then you couldn't vote, and Africans were not allowed to buy property, so all those little sneaky ways for restricting them from voting, but the 15th Amendment gave them the ability to vote.
Hey! The second topic we're going to talk about is the conflict over slavery and how it was a primary cause of the American Civil War. Yep. And as the war came to a close, there were plans for Reconstruction.
The Civil War is fighting between the same people in the same country and is very devastating. The American Civil War was extremely bad for the American government due to the fact that we lost American lives, spent money for war, and we had tensions before and also after the war between the North and the South.
Due to the extensive damage of the war, there was major goal of rebuilding all of the damage that had been done. There was physical damage and destruction, like buildings that had to be rebuilt, but also to rebuild the American people. After the war, there were still tensions between whites and blacks, and equality of the people was a hard thing to grasp, and it took a while to build that equality. The third topic, we're going to review the disputes between the presidency and Congress over the Reconstruction to establish the context for the role of Amendments 13 through 15 and the efforts to restore former Confederate states to the Union.
Because of President Johnson's leniency, the southern states were able to enact black codes, which restricted freed African American activities and an ability to find work. Congress passed the Reconstruction Act, which forced states to ratify the 14th Amendment and broadened citizenship. Congress adopted the 15th Amendment in 1870, which expanded the right to vote to any race.
President Andrew Johnson was part of the Union, and his plans for Reconstruction reflected his staunch Unionism. The presidents put in the 13th Amendment in place to require and uphold the abolition of slavery. Topics
Kind of weird. Topics too.
These amendments were important
because
passing these amendments were important because equality between whites.
Should we have someone saying it other than you guys? Like, why was passing these amendments important?
No.
oh, like a question.
Well, I can be like that. Look.
Why was you talking like that? You sound kind of constipated.
Constipated person.
Alright.
Alright, just go then. I
Are you
think it's
sure?
gonna sound
Why
boring.
doesn't Haley ask me?
If you want to ask them, go ahead.
Even though
Alright.
I don't know
You ready?
Jesus.
Why was passing these amendments important?
These amendments were important to be passed because equality between whites and blacks were highly frowned upon and disagreed. Since Africans did everything that whites had done, like go to war and all, it was important for the blacks to not be treated differently even though everyone was all living in the same country.
What was the climate of the country?
This is one of the most turbulent times and controversial eras in American history. This was America's first interracial democracy, and tensions between the North and the South were still present, as the North created laws that gave more rights to free blacks, and the South created practices that prevented those laws.
After implementation, how well did the U.S. government do in enforcing these new laws?
The U.S. had enforced the laws and they were to be followed. However, there were still disagreements about being equal, so there were still fighting and segregation, but not that all eventually is totally moved away.
Who was behind the implementation of these amendments?
Abraham Lincoln was behind the 13th Amendment.
Did it come easy or hard?
It was hard for Abraham Lincoln